Welcome to my PHP tutorial. I do want to let you guys know a few things before we get too far into this. This is a little bit of a long video. I would tap the video screen and see that you have enough time to complete this. If you don't, I would suggest saving it to your watch for later. You might want to get through here in several sessions. This is a big video, but it also contains a lot. It contains pretty much most of your building blocks for PHP. The way this is presented, the way I'm able to present a whole language like this in the time that I have on this video is because I'm expecting that you're already initiated in programming. And so if you're not already familiar with programming in general, programmed in a different language or something like that, then I would also suggest put it in the watch for later queue, go into my channel and look up some of my basics of programming type videos where I talk about basic programming concepts. And once you've watched a few of those, once you feel like you kind of have an idea about some of these things that we're going to be talking about, then we should go ahead and go forward. But I would go ahead and watch those videos if you're not familiar. Make sure you have the time. It is not geared towards PHP experts. This is really about the basics. So what I'm going to be talking about in here, PHP is a very large language, and it has a heap of functions, a bunch of libraries that it starts up with. So we're not going to go through the entire core of PHP on this. We will go over enough that we can create some basic command line interface environment programs. So it's going to be detailed enough. You can do some basic stuff right after you're done watching the video. This will be visual, so it's not going to be just a talk. You do want to be where you can actually really watch your screen and probably even follow along if you can. So yeah, PHP is it's a very useful script. It's a very useful type of script here that it's used on web. It can be used for command line interface. You can also run it for network type applications as well. There's a lot of uses for it. So let's start taking a look and seeing what exactly are some of these basics. It is a mid-level or intermediate type language. This is one that's not a great beginner start. Yes, you can start out with it, but it's intermediate. It's a mid-level language, meaning it's between the high-level ones like if you really want a high-level one, a good beginner one, that would be Python, that would be Basic, some of those. And then these guys are the mid-level ones, and there are some other ones that are even tougher. You know, you get into machine code and you're just talking numbers to the computer. This is a cross-platform interpreted language. So it runs with an interpreter. So what happens with this is you run an interpreter that is designed for whatever platform you're running it on. If you're on Linux, they make a Linux interpreter. If you are on Windows, they make a Windows interpreter. Whatever platform you're on, if you can get that interpreter, that's what caters to the needs of that individual system. And then it runs a script that meets a standard, the PHP standard, and it's going to read that same thing for the most part wherever you run that script. So you can take a script that you wrote on Linux and run it on Windows, or wrote it on Windows and run it on Linux. There are some exceptions to that. If you're dealing with file system paths and stuff like that, that can get a little bit tricky to make sure that that actually works right. But a lot of your other functionality, it's not like you have to recompile it. It's not compiled. It's interpreted on the fly. It's a text file, and it's interpreted on the fly. And it's very fast for what it is, for being so big with all of the functions and all these libraries already loaded into it with each instance, it's insanely fast. It's one of the faster interpreted languages that there are. There are some other faster ones if you did direct assembly, machine code, some of the compiled languages like C, C++, they could probably beat this. But for the most part, it's a very fast language. It's very powerful. You use it in many environments. Command line interface, web, some of the network stuff. You know, if you're going to run something over Telnet, this would probably be something to run, or SSH. All kinds of uses for CLI programs, and this is very good at CLI. And web has its differences. I'm going to do a different video on PHP for web, but it's going to play a lot on this. So if you're really looking at getting into PHP for web coding, you're in the right spot. It'll be this video, and then there will be another video on that, and there will be some other things too where I talk about accessing databases, file systems, dealing with your XML access, all that stuff there through building web services, and those will be different videos. It uses a standard curly brace block format for your style, and this is I call it standard curly brace. I call it the standard one because it's very widely used. This style of programming is used across, it's used also across Perl, it's used across Ruby, Java, C, C++. I'm sure there's a whole bunch more. Those are just the ones I can think of off the top of my head that use this style. Alright, it's also got great encapsulation, so if you're really trying to make something that's extensible and is easy to keep track of and easy to debug, and we're going to talk about some of the debugging stuff in here too, the debugging features of the language. So this is a language video. This is dealing with the core of the language. There will be other videos I'm going to come out with for other little subsections of different languages. So let's take a look at some of the source code and kind of get an idea on what exactly you're getting into when you get into PHP. So right up into here, you'll notice the first line. Now this is a pretty big file, and it's partly because that curly brace block format can be a large number of lines, but a lot of these lines are just the curly braces. And I have it like that because I just think that makes it easier to see. But you'll notice it's also encapsulated down here. Everything that is PHP code needs to be in one of these PHP encapsulations. There, and it ends with a question mark and a greater than sign. All the code goes between. This can be changed with the PHP configuration. You can also allow it to use the ASP style, active service pages style of eliminate the PHP text. That's the short style as well. That's the other one you can use. It's just eliminating the PHP text there. And then if you change the question marks to percent signs, you can also allow that as well. But everything needs to be in here. If I don't have it in there, it's just going to show it as plain text. Comments are also something good to be aware of. You'll notice here a / starts a block comment, and a / and the way it's easy to remember that is you just think about how something is drawn. If you're going to draw a box with asterisks, you know, one of those really good looking boxes, you know, kind of like what I'm doing right here. You draw a box in there and you got the slashes there. That's the way I remember it. So a / starts a block comment. That means it's going to ignore everything it sees The interpreter will ignore everything it sees until it reaches a // and exits the block comment. So I can block out multiple lines very easily. Most of this structure that they use, this format, this curly brace format, also supports this style of commenting. Very convenient for that multi-line function. You'll also see here that you've got the double line down here, double slash, and that is for a line comment. Everything wherever that starts until the next line drop is going to be a comment, which means it will not process that as any type of code. It's just going to ignore it. It's for the user, it's for the programmer, it's not for it, and it simply ignores it. So, in basic input and output, these lines right here, these guys work. You have a lot of control. That's one of the things which I absolutely love about PHP, is you have a lot of control with your output. In a way, it's kind of, sometimes it's a little bit annoying that you have to do so much, but I appreciate being able to. So here I have echo. Echo means to output. And it's actually a directive, so I don't need to do the parenthesis on here. Most things are functions, and you have to do, all functions in PHP need to have a parenthesis, just like down here on the unset. See how I've got a parenthesis, parenthesis, and then values inside. Here I don't need that though. This is just a directive. Print is an alias for echo. So I generally like to go right to whatever the main command is. I just feel like it's going to run faster that way. So, and it's also shorter, saves space over print. So, you know, it's one letter short, and that adds up. I mean, all these echoes we got. So we got a prompt, and then I'm going to draw in an input line, and that's where I'm going to go ahead and get. And there's 3 standard streams that are actually very common for PHP, C. It's very common, 3 streams. STD, well, STD is for standard, and then they've got in, which is for input. This is my keyboard inputs that it's going to try to read. Echo sends it out to STD out, the standard output stream, and there's also a standard error stream, which can go towards a log or wherever I want to send that to. It's generally not visible as easily. But that's where you have those standard streams that everything that I'm inputting on my keyboard is going to come into that standard in. Everything that I output through my echoes in here is going to go to my standard out. And errors that occur go to standard error. And so once that's done, what happens is that's going to wait for a line, because this is a command line interface program. It waits till I've actually entered the entire line, then it returns the code with the line drop and puts all of that, the line drop included, into my input line variable. Variables in PHP, they're automatic as far as their types, but they do have a number of different types that I have right down here. But they're automatic as far as which one they select. You can specify, but you don't need to. It's just going to try and figure out what type of data you have and give you the appropriate type for that. It happens automatically. It's wonderful that way. Input line. Alright, so that puts it into a variable, and $signs preceding a text indicate a variable. It's got to have the $sign. That's one of the requirements for PHP. And we'll get down a little bit further where we're going to see some spots where it does not, because it's a object inside of another object. Only the first in that case needs to have the $sign. Other stuff won't get the $sign. So it's a start of a variable. Everything else that's like a function reference does not. This is a function. So it's a function. I say get from my input. Alright, and then after that, so once it does that, while I'm doing that line input, it is going to also draw that up there on the screen, including my line drop that I have to enter. So once I'm done entering it, I press enter, it returns to me. But that enter was also done on the screen. So now I'm going to be on a new line already down here. And that's where that new line is also going to be in this variable. So it's going to create that new line here. But I have to do each of my new lines manually with this. That's one of the things about PHP. But it gives you a little bit of extra control to do some things with your command line interface programs that aren't easy to do with anything else. So for variables, we did discuss a fair amount of that, but we are also going to take a look. We can do a multiple variable assignment. See, I've got two variables here and they both got assigned to 1. Then I'm going to take one of my variables and I can do a standard increment or decrement, which means double plus next to it, adds 1 to it, double minus takes away 1. Or I can add a certain amount, plus equals, adds whatever this number is, minus equals, subtracts whatever that number is to this. So I'm basically modifying what's over here, what's on the left side of my operators. And that we'll see that when we do our outputs, that the other variable stayed a 1 because we never changed it, and this one here, I think it becomes a 3 because it starts to 1, adds 1, adds 1. Yeah, it should be a 3. So we should see a 3 and we should see a 1 when we run this. In fact, we're going to do that. So that's the prompt that I told you about. And as I press enter, it automatically does that. It says I entered, test, now 3, 1. Now let's go down and take a look a little bit more into some other things here. This is also another thing that we can do to unset if we want to delete a variable at any point, we can unset it. Unset past the variable we want to get rid of, and that thing is gone. So that's one option to get rid of things early. Otherwise, the garbage collector will take care of it. PHP has excellent garbage collection. It is super efficient. I love PHP for its efficiency. As far as it being good on your system, can't go wrong with it. Alright, for our arrays, PHP supports really kind of a key value store type of array. You can just enter them without the keys as well, but this is with the keys, so the keys are optional, but the values you've got to have, and they're comma separated. So I can use the array keyword, and that's kind of like creating the array, and everything in there becomes a part of that array. I can also just use a square bracket and do the shorthand way. Do the same thing inside there. You choose your method. I oftentimes do end up with the curly bracket. I'm sorry, not curly, that's a square bracket. Curlies are for blocks, which we will get, oh yeah, into control structures. Here we go. We're going to get into that. So this is one of the areas where I did have a line of output from this as well. Now here we assign a variable, and variable assignment, yeah, we assign it to there, it's automatic, then it exists once we've assigned to it. And we check to see if it's 0, and if it is, we're going to output 0. If it is, which it is 0. Now you'll notice we got to use an assignment operator on here. This is a double equals for an assignment. You don't want to have, especially not like a equals 0, because then it's going to assign, it's going to obliterate whatever that original value was in A and assign to it instead of trying to compare. It creates a bad logic error in your code. So use double equals. There's a number of different other operators that you can use. You'll find those in the documentation for PHP. I will point out to you that documentation when we're done, and let you go and see all kinds of additional functions and additional things that you can do and how you can just really explore the PHP world. But this is one comparison operator that you can use. So we check to see if it's 0. If it is, we output 0. Now if it is less than or equal to 0, then we say it's negative. Now being that it's 0, it also matches this. But because this is an else if, it's only else if. So because it ran here on the 0, it's not going to run this other one and tell me that it's negative. And then if neither one of those two run, then it runs the else, which is to show that it's positive. And that's where we have the output right in here where it is 0. Now we're going to see some looping. We're going to see some looping going on now, which is another type of control structure. It helps you to... Control structures are what you use to kind of control the flow of what's happening. Are you... conditional decisions and loops and error handling. All right. So while this condition is true, while a is less than 2. Now what is a? We started it up here. It's a. A equals 0. So yes, it's less than 2. That condition will be true. It comes on in, and it's going to output that. And of course, we got to add a line drop. That's what this is. This is a line drop character. Now you'll notice too that I've got two different types of quotes on here. The single quote is one of my favorites when it applies, because there's only like 2 types of escape characters you have to worry about. Escape characters are ways to give a special character, such as right here, backslash, and then some type of something here. So a double backslash would be an escape character for backslash. If I actually wanted to put a backslash in this value, because backslash is the escape character, I have to escape it. So I'd have to use a double backslash. Now if I wanted to create a quote inside here, I would have to use backslash single quote. But other than that, it does not worry about anything else inside of a single quote. So I have freedom to do all kinds of stuff in there. On the double quote, it recognizes a whole bunch more escape characters, such as new lines and tabs. Slash T is tab, slash N is new line. There's a whole bunch of them. And so it's just, I would rather keep it to where it's simple, and that's the reason why I do the single quote. But that's the difference between the two. Double quote, you have more options for escape characters in PHP. So down here, of course, I have to escape a new line. That won't work in single quote. To be able to do a new line in single quote, I would actually have to put the line drop in the line, which looks tacky. So that's why I like to do a double quote and do the new line escape character. So that way I got one line on one line. It makes a little bit more sense to the human and the computer that way. So we're going to increment that. After we display that, that was a 0 as it came in. It gets incremented. That's what that double plus was again. Becomes a 1 and comes back on over here. It's still less than 2. Comes back, writes the 1, adds another 1 to it. It's now 2. Comes back on over here. Oh, it's equal to 2. It is not less than if it is equal to. I didn't say it was equal to or less than or equal to. I said it was strictly less than. Therefore, it's going to simply bypass. It won't do anything else. So we're going to see a 0 and we're going to see a 1, and then we're going to see where it parts between these two loops, between a while and a do while loop. So taking a quick look at that, 0, 1, because once it reached 2, we didn't do anything. And then this is where it breaks, and it goes down to the other loop. And that's where we're going to see it goes to 1. So why does it do 2, 1? All right, let's take a nice little look at this critter. A do while is very similar to a while. It's just that we use do at the start, and that allows me to put the while at the end, which means I'm now checking for what's happening at the end, which means it's going to run at least once, and then it will check for you at the end. So here, it's coming in. We know we had a 2 because it incremented before it left. It got over here, and then it said, oh, it was equal to 2. So it was 2 when it came down here. So it's going to output 2 and a new line, and it's going to take that down 1. And as long as A is greater than 0, it will continue to go back to do. And outputs that, 1, writes that, takes 1 away, it's 0. Oh, well, it's equal to 0. It is not greater than 0 still. So we're exiting. That's where we get our 2, 1 from. Now we're going to get into, we're not going to have too many other outputs for a little while. Here we're going to just talk about some of this stuff here. So this is exceptions, okay? Right up and into here. Error handling and exceptions. And actually I should just mark that. Alright. So we have a try block. A try block is where we are trying the code to see if it throws an exception. If we don't handle an exception, PHP has an extra thing that it will check for, which is if we set up an exception handler. If we do that, it will send the error to that error handler, and then if it does not have that set up though, then it will crash PHP. It will say unhandled exception, exiting, your program will crash. So to prevent that, the first line of defense is the try block. Within a try block, anytime an exception is thrown, can be thrown manually, such as by a throw command, like we did here. And it could also be done by some other function. That's what we're testing or trying to see if this other function, you know, for example, you're trying to see if a directory exists or if you can do something that you don't know if you can. You don't know if it's going to return an error. So you run it in a try block, and it will then throw an exception if there is a problem. And when it does, then you can catch it. And you can have a number of these catch blocks. Then you can also have multiple types of exceptions separated by pipe character. Pipe character is that one just above the backslash. Push shift and backslash, you'll get a pipe. And so you can have multiple types, and it's going to look down here to find which exception it can throw it into. And by using exception in general, that means everything. Everything extends exception in PHP. Everything except for maybe your user created stuff, that may just extend throwable, but I generally like to extend exception. So that way I have that, that handling. So it's going to look on in here. At this point, I'm going to have access to my exception. It will be referred to as the error object variable. So it's going to take that exception. It will be this variable as it's down here. So anything which I call off this variable is for that exception. Now, no matter what happens, well, another thing too, at the try block, if an error is incurred, it will not execute anything past that, wherever that exception was thrown at. But once we get down here to a finally block, this is an optional block that we can have. We need at least one catch for a try. We can optionally have multiple catches. We can optionally have a finally if whatever is in finally runs no matter what. All right. So we can also set exception handler. That's where we send it the name of the exception handling function, and here's a sample of an exception handling function. But I'm going to take a look over here. This function is what I'm going to use to describe what functions, how do we write a good function for PHP. And of course you're going to use the function keyword. I'm using this one because it's a lot more complex than the error handler one. So we have the name of the function. That means whenever I call it, which we will see, actually I don't think I ever call this function, but we have some other functions that I will call, I think. Alright, a function call to this would be my function, parenthesis, and then all my values in there. Kind of like I call the function right up here. This would be a function call, parenthesis, value, comma, value, comma. So this is the only one required because it does not have a default value. Once you start entering a default value, you have to continue giving them default values. But those that don't have default values must be specified when you call them. So I can call this with a single argument, or I can call it with 2 arguments, or I can call it with 3 arguments. But I cannot call it with no arguments or with 4 arguments. It's got to be somewhere between 1 and 3 arguments. This first one, you'll notice, is ampersand. This means it's passed by reference. That means if I alter it, I can pass a variable, and if I alter it inside of my function, then whenever I access it again, once the function's returned later on down the code, my alteration's stuck. As opposed to, because I was passed the memory address for it and modified, any modifications I made inside my function were to the original variable. Now, here I've got a type declaration. That means I have to pass it a string. But being that I don't have an ampersand on this, this is passed by value, which means I'm actually getting the full value, and I can modify this however I want to in my function, and it's not going to affect anything outside my function. And it has a default value over here. This is an optional feature, but it makes it an optional entry. It means that if I do not enter that while I'm calling the function, then this default value is used in that stead. So if I only draw it with 1, if I call this function with only 1 argument, the second argument would be this default value, and the third argument would be joke. If I called it with only 2, I would have whatever I called it with for the first 2 arguments, and the last one would be joke. And this is just another argument. So on here we could actually call this function, absolutely. So let's go ahead and do just that. So we are going to do it with the first one. Actually, that's going to mean that I need now I don't modify it in here, and I don't return a value. I could return a value as well by simply putting whatever I want to return, space, whatever I want to return on here. However, you know, I can enter whatever I want to on here as well. And now, actually I should have done a, and now I'm going to do, actually we're going to do 2. Alright, so one's going to be with 2, and the other one's going to be with 3. So this one has to be a string. I've got to go with something on end of here. My value. And the last one is going to be whatever I want, right? Joker. So once I rerun this, I can save this, I can rerun this, and that ability to just rerun it is part of the reason why, and you can see we have our values on here. We had the default, we had 1 overridden, we had 2 overridden. We can see how that worked. And that's why I like to use interpreted languages for my demonstrations, because it's much faster than waiting to recompile it. No one likes to sit there and wait for the compiler on the screen. Sure, it looks cool, but if you want to have it look cool, you know, run your compiler. Probably in my compiled languages I will have more of compiling to do, but most of my demonstrations I'm going to try and stick to interpreted languages when I can. It's kind of like dealing with microchips. I generally like to deal with stuff outside the microchip. Alright, classes. Now this means that I can create my own custom objects. And I talked about we have great encapsulation. You'll notice, well, in this case I've got a whole bunch of public stuff. And actually I didn't add anything that was private on this. But I could have one of these guys private, but I needed them all public for my purposes. So, but if I did want to, any of these things could be private. That means they could not be accessed outside the class. What you're going to see now is we have a class, and we have a class that extends another class. This class extends this class. This is a parent class. This is simply an IP address, and I just declare the IP up here to make it public. And then over here on my constructor, this is a constructor for PHP. And if you want one, you can use a destructor as well. It can do that automatically. The only reason why you really need to add a constructor is if you need to either activate a parent constructor or want to make it to where you can add values through the constructor. In this case, that's what I did. It's because it's academic, I wanted to show adding values there. So any parameters to this are values that we can add whenever we create it. So I can just simply pass the new IP address. If I don't pass it on, it's going to be this loopback IP address. Otherwise, I can simply add as a string or whatever that be. It's not actually enforced as a string on this case, so I could actually use numerics or whatever else for this class, and it will be assigned by this. This means this class. And then this is an internal operator. This means going inside this class, getting my IP variable, and you'll notice there's no dollar there. That means this is within. So this is where I need my dollar, and this is just all part of the same as far as PHP recognizes it. Now it's taking my internal IP that I had here, whatever was passed, whether it was a passed value or whether it took the default, and it's going to take that, shove it in here, and assign it up to here. So destructor can just run, and in this case here it pulls out that IP. You know, good luck finding that server. Hey, it just got terminated. Now another thing to know about these constructors and other functions, if you don't use this while it's here, if you don't assign it somewhere permanent, it will disappear. The only way you can save that is to actually put it somewhere that will be saved on one of the variables on one of the class members. Okay, so this is a base class, and now we're going to extend it. As we see here, the extends keyword is now used, and that's my base class is IP address. In our case, we're adding port, but that's not the only member, because it also has, that's what class inheritance means. It's getting everything that the previous class had. So it's got a public IP, And it's got a public port now, as now we're dealing with TCP and IP together. And here I have the both optional values, so I can go with default. I can straight call the constructor and go with default, a loop back to the HTTP port, or I can input those and override those. Now to call the parent, I'm calling the parent and calling its constructor, parent's constructor here, and I'm calling its constructor with my IP address because that's part of the base class information it's supposed to have, and that would be stored in there. That way I don't have to really add it onto here. I mean, I could just call that just construct and nothing, and then add an extra line here that changes it. I have my option because that's a public item on there. It's a public variable. Now here I am calling port. This once again is just like what we did up here. Exact same thing. We're just doing it with port. So the destructor is the same concept as well. I just went ahead and said, yeah, good luck finding a connection to the IP and the port. And they're all a part of this because it has inherited all of its parents' things. So when it's destroyed, it will call that. And since this destructor is declared, it's not going to try to call this destructor. It just calls the first destructor as it finds as it goes up the hierarchical tree, up to parents and grandparents and whatever else it's inherited from. So here we see a class creation. Here I'm creating the child class and it will have everything in here. Now, yes, I created it with a different IP address, but I'm leaving the port the same because I did not override it. So it's going to be the default port on here. But I'm changing the IP here from what it is up here. So I'm calling it with one argument. That's what that does. So that's classes, and that's how that works. We're also going to take a look here at libraries and environment inspection. These are the last items we deal with before I'm going to show you the documentation about this stuff. And, well, we'll show you the final outputs, then the documentation, and then I'll let you go and build your own goodies with this. So, to import a library, you can write a file that has classes, functions, whatever you want to in there that you want to continue to be able to import that into other scripts. You know, maybe you have a function you really like and you want to keep using it and using it. It's something that cleans up your strings really well or whatever it be. And so I'm going to write that favorite function into a library, which is it's a PHP file that has those classes and those functions in it. And to include that, I would use the include. Now, include, and then that would be as a string the path to whatever the library was that I had created. Now I can also use require instead of include. Include means it's only going to throw a warning and allow my program to continue if there's ever a problem including that file. But with require, if there's a problem including that file, it will crash my application. That's an error, and it will crash. And once again, you can try throw catch on that too. It's an error, right? So environment inspection. How can we find out more about our environment on this? The var dump function gives us a ton of details on things, and in this case we're going to dump the class that we created up there, that child class. It still exists. And then we can also unset that class as well. And that's when we're going to see that destructor trigger. We're going to get a message from that. And then we're going to see about what type of environment variables are sent. This is an array that is sent, and to access elements of an array, you would simply call it as an array operator, grabbing something in there. That would be to call the user key, and then I would be returning the user value from that. All right. So then we're going to see whatever's in the environment variable. So let's see those last few. This is the dump that we get from from the class. So it shows me that it's an object, and this is the name of the object, or actually, I'm sorry, that's the type of the object, and it's an instance. So apparently we also created a different instance of it somewhere else, because I think that means it's the second instance. I'm not sure why we did that. And then we've got the port, and we've got the IP, and the type, what's the value? The type, the length, and what's the value. So if it had additional objects inside on that value, it would have that object. And so it can really give you a lot of details on this var dump. You can get a lot of details on different things. So yeah, and then this is the destructor called. Good luck finding the connection. Well, because we just lost it, right? We destroyed the class. And then the array. It has no elements in here. So there are no environment variables sent to this program. And I'm not sure why that is. But for whatever reason, PHP is not passing me any environment variables to my script. So, with that, that's PHP. And if you want to find out more about PHP, there's a whole documentation site, www.php.net/manual/your-language, English, EN, and you can search on in here. You can search all kinds of functions. You know, you can get your exit functions to exit early if things exist. Actually, it's something else exists. It's like function. You know, function exists and all that. It's got good autocomplete. You can go ahead and get tons of details on any other function that you want to see. And a lot of times they'll also have like groups of functions in here. So you can go on in here and see. They've oftentimes, like, you'll see groups like str. You know, most string functions start with str. You know, if you've got number functions, you know, they'll be numeric. They'll be integers. Well, actually, no, they don't really have much in the way of int on here. So it's mainly numerics. And then you can also just try and find functions by a group as well. A lot of times they'll show those as groups. Once you go into one of those, then you'll find a bunch of related functions to it. So it's really good to explore this and find out more about what your options are, but that shows you how to run and control a process.
Thank you for watching.